Trump stepped up his criticism of Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday. His frustration appearing to mount as Russia's war in Ukraine grinds on with no sign of a ceasefire, despite U.S. efforts to jumpstart talks. Speaking at the White House, Mr. Trump used an expletive and accused Mr. Putin of saying nice things that turned out to be meaningless.
We get a lot of thrown at us by Putin for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
And on Monday, the U.S. president said Washington would send more weapons to Ukraine, at least partly reversing last week's decision to halt some shipments. Mr. Trump said most of the weapons would be defensive. Let's talk about all of that with Michael Bociurkiw, non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Michael, it's great to have you with us. I know you're in Odesa, so very late there. Thank you for joining us tonight. How is this messaging from President Trump being seen there in Ukraine?
Well, good to be with you, Sumi. It's, people are deservedly skeptical, and a big reason is hours after Trump's threats were made, Kyiv is under attack once again. Mayor Klitschko of Kyiv just posted that there are many, many drones in the air, and we're also hearing reports of explosions in Dnipro and Zaporizhia. So these drone attacks are in about the 100, 150 mark, not the 500 ones we've seen. But having said that, I think it will be a sleepless night for Mr. Putin if you take into account Donald Trump's threats, the fact that he wants to restart shipments of arms to Ukraine, and by the way, another Patriot air defense system. That would be the first major weapon system to Kyiv since Biden stepped down. Also the tariff threats and a Senate bill in the works to put crippling tariffs on any country that does trade with Russia up to 500%. But Ukrainians are, after 3+ years of war, are pretty skeptical that things may change anytime quickly.
Yeah, the president's critics would say that the president has come to the realization that President Putin never meant for peace in Ukraine, that he always wanted to continue the war. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
It is a fair assessment. It goes back to, a year before he led his full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In that long, rambling statement he issued saying Ukraine and Russia are one, and that Ukraine is otherwise a failed state. So we know he's always had it in mind to invade and take over Ukraine and widen his territorial gains. But I think the only way that can be pushed back and reversed if Mr. Trump uses his leverage, whether it's tariffs, weapon shipments, but also his relationships with key Gulf states that continue to trade with Russia, that continue to allow Russian oligarchs to do business there. That would be really tightening the noose and also starving the Russian war machine of badly needed funds.
Well, I guess that would be the question, Michael, because sanctions, tough sanctions in the past from the European Union, from the U.S., haven't forced Putin's hand. So do you think a tougher stance from President Trump would make a difference?
I think it would only happen if, for example, that Senate bill does go through, and by the way, 85 Senate co-sponsors, if sanctions or tariffs rather of up to 500% on the major purchasers of Russian oil, meaning China and India, would actually go through. I doubt it. I'm skeptical of that, given the Trump's administration desire to restart relations with both countries, trade wars notwithstanding. But that's the only way that Mr. Putin can be pushed back if the war machine is starved of especially revenue from oil.
And Michael, in the meantime, of course, we have to say that the war continues. We know that Russia has continued to pound Ukraine from the air. Where do things stand on the battlefield?
Not very good. Russia has intensified its summer offensive. It could gain up to 60 kilometers if the worst case scenario happens. That could displace up to 250,000 Ukrainians, not only within Ukraine, but beyond the borders of Ukraine. And Sumi, I'm also beginning to see these kind of thin cracks in the support for Mr. Zelensky. The war effort has been very tough on people. And, a lot of his base are young people, and they're now beginning to question very aggressively online tough recruitment tactics that the military has been using here. And hence, it's very, very difficult to get more young men to the front line. So on the one hand, America can ship more weapons and its allies too. but they actually need hands to operate those weapons and push back the Russians from making gains on the front line.
Okay, Michael Bociurkiw, great to have you from Ukraine tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.